A lot of energy goes into creating something like this forum. And at times it's difficult to figure out what its value is. What are the kinds of ways it serves as a catalyst or as a part of some process in terms of social change? You've been around here for a few days. Have you reflected a little bit about that?
I think the most important thing is the change in perception that happens for individuals who are here. I spoke yesterday with a man who said that he had come prepared to learn a lot and acquire a lot of information, but he hadn't been prepared for the shift in perception that happened for him, that he was really seeing things in a new way, and it was as if his heart had opened.
Really?
And that really made a difference, and I was so moved by that. I thought, well, if each person here feels touched in some way and more inspired to make a difference, that accomplishes something, that many people are ready for action in various ways and go out re-inspired to work harder in accomplishing some of the goals that they have set for themselves, and in terms of making a difference in the world and building a sustainable society. But I think it's the inner shift that really perhaps has the most lasting effect.
Sam Keen was talking about people coming together to share the question, which I
Yes.
kind of liked. That whole image that you look around, you see all these people are really willing to wonder about this issue together.
And they're willing to give a great deal of time, and many of the people here are people who have very little spare time, and yet they've felt that it was important to make the effort to be here and to commit themselves to really wrestling with some of these difficult issues that are facing us as a global community, as planetary citizens. And that's been very inspiring to me, very heartening to see the willingness that people have, the enormous amount of goodwill and the enormous amount of commitment to being helpful and to compassionate service in some way.
One of the things that surprised me, or delighted me, was the range of people that were here.
Yes.
And one of the dimensions that was interesting were the kind of externalizers and the internalizers, or
Yes.
the people that look within and the people that look without. And talk a little bit about that dialogue, because I feel that the people that look without, there is some major shift they have to go through to accept the fact that they have some personal responsibility about their own development in relation to social change. I know it works the other way as well, that the inner people don't understand the outer, but that seems easier for me to hear in my own life anyway. What were your experience about that?
Well, in one of the roundtables, someone said that he didn't understand how looking within could help anybody love the planet or love the earth or be aware of the wonders of nature. And yet someone else said, well, that's what happens. When you do look within, you realize we're not separate from nature, we're part of it all. And so there is a natural flow of compassion that comes from deepening awareness. And I think that I was impressed by the fact that so many people who are really very effective in the business world also value going within. This was one of the most surprising things to me,
Really?
that these very competent and effective business people are willing to talk about the value of spiritual practice. And so that was something that I was impressed by, that we realize that to change the world, we have to change ourselves. We have to really change consciousness, that we're only dealing with symptoms of human behavior, really. All of our problems in the world are human-caused. So it's that willingness to look at our own consciousness that has to be the root of the change that brings about a sustainable society with a better quality of life for everyone.
It was interesting, when I talked with Thich Nhat Hanh, he said when he was invited here, he said he would come if he could have a day of silence here, and where people did practice.
Yes.
And he assumed they'd immediately turn him down and then he wouldn't come. And they said, well, we'll do something about that. And so one morning he had the meditation, and about 100 or 150 people came and did the breathing and the walking. And he said that so touched him to have, and this is, when I saw him speak at the luncheon, I saw him create a space that people entered into. I think a lot of the rest of it was talking about consciousness, but he was in fact creating the space of consciousness. Is that a distinction
Yes.
that you've noticed as well?
Yes, I noticed that, and I was also interested to see that happen in some of the roundtables. I noticed, for example, when you introduced just a few moments of silence and asked people to take 3 breaths, that changed the atmosphere in a way that allowed people to speak more from a deeper place inside themselves. And I've come to appreciate that enormously, the value of silence. And it doesn't have to be a long period, but just that shift in focus in coming from one's own core self and trusting that that's really what we all want. It's something that people are longing for. When we talked about ecology and spiritual longing, we see the intricate interrelationship of what we do in terms of our own awareness and how our desires can shift from wanting more of what we don't really want, more material possessions, more consumption, that kind of addiction that is so problematic these days, to really recognizing that what we truly want is a deeper sense of connection, connection to each other, connection to nature, connection to God. Whatever that longing is needs to be addressed more directly rather than trying to give ourselves substitute gratifications in the way of more things.
When you look at a social structure that involves advertising, television, business, government, and you take a look at that desire structure, and you see that people, as you say, as Thich Nhat Hanh or somebody says, want high happiness. The Dalai Lama
Yes.
says they want to be happy.
Yes.
And they now experience happiness in a way through pleasure. And they experience pleasure through gratification through things and through relationships and through things external. And so more is better, and they keep wanting more and more. And that seems to be such a powerful social structure and a value structure at the moment.
Yes.
It's easy for us who have realized that there's another game to see that. But what do you do for people that are in it? Because the issue is, do you legislate to force that, or do you wait in an evolutionary sense, or do you seduce? What do you do? Because in Thich Nhat Hanh's 5 precepts, he says, stop looking at television. But how do you tell somebody? What do you do?
Yes, I don't think that that coercive utopias ever work. That's been a problem of the 20th century, that there have been many people who had ideas about the ideal society, and they tried to enforce their ideas on the rest of the people. And so I think that as we're looking at the possibility of a more democratic structure, both socially and in a sense spiritually, I think the idea of spiritual democracy is also important, so that people come to the realization of what is truly meaningful to them out of their own experience. And I think that wanting more material possessions, it's like wanting approval from your peers. It's a natural stage of development. It's as though it's an adolescent stage of development. And as we mature, as we grow older, if we have the opportunity for healthy human development, our desires shift. They change from wanting possessions to wanting love relationships, to wanting to care for people, to wanting to serve. And I think that the motivations shift as we mature. And so there are people, I think, at all levels of the socioeconomic spectrum that want to be able to make a contribution, to make a difference, to contribute in some way to the well-being of others. And what I saw here is that it's not only older people, and it's not only women who want to serve, but it's also many, many men and also many young people. I was very impressed with the young people who were here. The young people who came from 25 different countries and worked together and learned about building community and about diversity and about overcoming language barriers and differences in order to build a community, really a global sense of community. And when they spoke at the end of the meeting yesterday, they were so inspiring and they were so eager to go out and take action. They really have that energy for action in the world, and I was very impressed by that and very moved by it. So it's not just older people, and it's not just people who have somehow developed the capacity for empathy. It's also people who naturally are inclined in that direction.
But I just want to I don't mean to be the devil's advocate, but in the past few years, the amount of television looking has gone up per day, per family in this culture. Now, obviously, there are kids from all over the world who are eager to change the system, but those people are still basically in the minority.
Yes.
And the welfare and the survival of the social systems, the minorities don't necessarily win in the game.
That's true.
And I'm asking you, with the majority, how do you put the fire under the system? How do you change it? Because good news doesn't sell, for example. What do you do?
Well, I think that we need to recognize the enormous power of the media. And I think that the media needs to recognize what a tremendous influence it has, and that it has enormous potential for positive change as well as for reinforcing negative patterns of addiction. So I think until we become more conscious of what we're doing to our collective mindset through the media, I think that the efforts at change are not going to be as effective as they could be if the media were really used in a more positive way. I think that's one of the root issues, one of the main problems that we need to address. And the other one, I think, is population pressures. That all of the talk about the environmental problems are ineffective unless we also address population pressures. It's as though talking about sustainability is very important, and education is very important, and helping people realize what the problems are. All of that is important, but that's like cutting away at the branches of the tree and not looking at the roots. So that in order to really look at the roots of the environmental problem, I think we have to address attitudes towards family planning, sexuality, and population problems. So I was very glad to hear someone bring that up and mention that that's something we did need to talk more about. It was mentioned 2 or 3 times during the week, but in my view, it didn't really get enough attention.
Also, what keeps coming up is the increasing disparity between haves and have-nots.
Yes.
And perhaps the only solutions in a large scale are to increase what the have-nots have, because to get the haves to give up what they have seems extremely unlikely unless you're going to, they're not going to do it out of compassion or out of a sense of generosity. They're only going to do it if it's taken away from them. And the question becomes one of revolution versus evolution. In other words,
yes,
you know, and I can't hear that one clearly.
Well, what I think is that there's always been that disparity. There are extremes of wealth and poverty in many of the countries of the world. And one of the things that has evolved in this culture is a much larger middle class. And yes, we still have extremes, but we also have proportionately a much larger middle range. And the other thing that struck me was how much there's a tendency to philanthropy among people who do have more than what they need. I've been impressed in meeting people who have started foundations with their family fortunes, for example, and who are really committed to helping development, grassroots development in in developing countries, and also are committed to philanthropy or charitable giving in one way or another. It's really quite extraordinary, and we don't hear about that in the news. We don't hear about all of the work that is being done in that direction. So yes, I do believe that we will have a revolution unless we evolve in that direction, but I don't think it's impossible to evolve that way.
What I guess would be required is a shift in what is valued for a sense of a feeling of goodness about oneself or adequacy about oneself.
Yes, it's a feeling of satisfaction.
Yeah.
You know, if you've been successful, for example, in the business world, do you derive satisfaction from just doing more of the same, or do you get more of a sense of satisfaction from empowering others? And I think that came up also in the discussion of leadership, and how leadership these days really calls for authenticity, integrity, and the ability to empower others, because leadership nowadays has shifted from the authoritarian leader to the team builder, the person who is able to empower others and to share power rather than hold power over others. And so I was very interested to hear those discussions of leadership, because our ideas of what's needed in the way of leadership are changing. And the fact that there's an increasing diversity, and so that every individual needs to decide how he or she wants to lead their own life, that we are all leaders in a certain way. And as on the internet, for example, anybody can be a leader. So it's a very interesting shift that's happening in the world today.